In this lesson, we'll talk about using multiple paint layers. Now we can start to blend and combine those together. So let's go ahead and jump in here with our base texture finished out on the diffuse. So we have just one paint layer. We can now start to add multiple paint layers. And so to do that, we can simply hit this button here, or we can come up here and say New Layer. Then we can choose again the name of the layer. So in this case, maybe we just want to put back color. We can make that whatever size we want, so you don't have to have all of the diffuse paint layers the same size. You can have those different sizes. We want to go ahead and put it again into diffuse, and so we'll go ahead and say OK to that, and it's going to create a new layer on top of our color base. So the way this works is just as you would expect. We would see the top layer first and then the bottom layer. So if we were to have something painted in here, it's going to be over this bottom layer. And we can use these blend modes to blend the layers together, just as you would in something like Photoshop. So let's say that we want to now add some color. So let's go in with our paintbrush and let's get something that is maybe a little bit brighter than what we might normally want. We could come in here. If we wanted to use a stamp, we could do that. We could just kind of turn that off for now. And we can come in here and start to paint through this. So let's say we want to paint some red on the back of our dinosaur. A little bit of color in here. And it's pretty easy to see this. We'll just send it all the way back to the tail. Okay. Just a little bit of rough color in here. Okay, and this is actually on our new paint layer, so that if we were to go in and turn it off, you can see nothing that we've painted on our original layer is affected. So in that way, it's kind of like our sculpt and sculpt layers, where we've just got one bit of detail on this particular layer, and we can isolate that. Okay, we can also lock it so that we can't do any sort of painting on it. Okay, we can also change the strength if we want to dial down the intensity of that. We can take that all the way down, so that's nice. You can blend that together. We can also use our blend modes. So we could come in here and let's say multiply, and you can see we can make that dark, and then we can still come in and change the darkness of that. Okay. Now to come in and remove detail from a particular layer, we could use erase. So we could come in here and erase detail out. And that works. The only problem is if we ever want to get that detail back, we would have to go back and repaint it. So if you have something that is a little bit more complex, you may not want to come in and erase it. Well, we can actually use layer masks to show parts of our paint layer and hide other parts. So to add a layer mask, we can just hit the little layer mask here. We can come up here and go ahead and add new layer mask. And that's going to be indented a little bit from our paint layer. You can see the little mask icon. And so now when we paint, we're actually not painting on the paint layer. We're painting a mask to tell us what we want to actually see. And so let's go ahead in our paintbrush, and I'm going to get black. And wherever I paint black is where I don't want to see this particular paint layer. So if I come in here and paint this all black, you can see that's all gone away. I can't see that red color anymore. But it's still within that paint layer. So if I ever come back with white and paint in here, you can see I can now get back that detail that was originally showing in that paint layer. Okay, so this is a nice way to isolate detail. I can come in here, and if I want to break this up a little bit, I can do that. You know, I'm just using a basic paintbrush here, but I could come in and use stamps and stencils just as I would with any other layer. Come in here and break things up a little. Kind of break that up a bit. We can get a kind of a lower brush strength to kind of blend that back in. Again, I'm not painting on that paint layer. I'm actually painting the layer mask so that we can define what's going to actually be seen from that particular layer. All right. So you can play around with with different details that you want to add, and then blending them together with your paint layer. We can also come in with our actual layer itself and blend that back into the body a little bit more so it's not so drastic. Okay, if you want to come in here and continue that, get our paintbrush, you can see that color in here. We can go ahead and grab that color, and again making sure that our paint layer is selected, we could come in and start to paint that through. Increase the strength here. And go back to normal and sample that. Okay. And then I can go ahead and paint that through and add a little bit of detail all the way out to the head here if I want to add a little bit of that. Okay, and then go back into your mask, get the black, and then come in and define where that's actually going to show through. So it just gives you a little bit more flexibility when you're working. All right, so that is multiple paint layers and layer masks. We can also import new paint layers. So if you have a texture that you've already created for your model, you've done it in another application, whatever the case may be, you can always import that as a paint layer. And that's a common question. And so let's go ahead and look at that. We can go in here and say import layer. And in our lesson 10 project files, we'll find this spots.bmp. So let's go ahead and open that up. We can choose a channel for that to be imported into. And let's just import it into the diffuse. And that's actually imported it in as a mask. And so let's go ahead and just click and drag that out into the diffuse. And so now the spots image is on top. And so we can choose different methods of blending that together. And we do soft light, and we can take that strength down a little bit so it's a little bit lower and get something that we want. So you can integrate existing textures into the new paint layers that you have. You still have those separated out. You can still modify those to your heart's content. So we can go ahead and use those, use that to kind of bring out some of the scales that we've got. Again, we can dial that back color down a bit to blend it back into the body. Okay, so even though we've got all of this paint going on, we still have a lot of flexibility in being able to come in and change things up. Okay, now right now all of these paint layers are contributing to the diffuse, or just the basic color. Let's say we want to add some paint to define something else that has to do with the material. Let's say the specular. Well, we can go ahead and create a new map, and let's actually make this 1K, and we'll call this T-Rex spec. And under the channel, we can choose, instead of diffuse, we can choose the specular. So now this map is going to actually drive the specularity of this T-Rex. So let's go into our material and take a look at our spec. So you can see now that we've got our maps associated with this. We have little buttons next to the diffuse and the specular. We can go ahead and open that up to go ahead and look for maps, but we've got those assigned here because we're doing our painting. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what happens when we start to come in and do some painting on this. So I'm going to take a kind of gray, and let's get an alpha randomize. And so here on our T-Rex, on the specular map, I can start to come in, and it looks like I'm painting, I'm lightening it up, but I'm actually affecting the specularity of this. So coming in and brightening up the spec. Okay. And so this is actually affecting the specular. Now we can also copy layers into this. So let's say if we wanted to take our spots, and we could duplicate that paint layer, and we could actually drag it from the diffuse into the specular, and we can combine multiple specular maps here. We drag this down here, and so now our spots are a little bit more specular. We could go ahead and bring that down a bit. Okay, but we can start to combine this with our underlying layer. So I can make the bottom of him a little bit more specular. Okay, and you can always take the lights that you have and start to change those up if you're not able to kind of see some of those changes. Okay, we can also come into the material, go to edit, we can go to gloss. We could kind of increase that glossiness. Okay, And so in areas of high specularity, we can add more of a gray. In areas of lower specularity, we can add more closer to a black. We could come in here on around the eye, maybe make it a little bit more specular. All right. We can also, if we go back to layers, we could also come in, and if we go ahead and create a new layer, you can see that we have a lot of different options here for, we can create opacity if we have something that should be transparent. We have, we can create bump maps, normal maps, reflection masks, and so forth. Now, if we want to actually see one of these layers, we start to get a number of layers in here, and we want to start to work with these. If we right click on this, or we come up here, you can see that we have options for solo selected. So for instance, if I take these spots and I solo the selected, it's going to only show me the spots here. So it's going to turn all of those layers off, and now I can just see the spots. Okay, I can right click and unsolo. And I can do the same thing down here on the specular, but if you have a map that is not part of the diffuse and you want to solo it and you want to see it actually as a color map, you can say solo as diffuse, and that will show you your map as a diffuse. So you can see we've got a fairly transparent map, but it's got a little bit of value in there. Okay, and so that can be helpful. You can unsolo that. Same thing here, solo as diffuse. And there you can see that we have this black map with sort of the white spots on it that we can see not as specular but as the diffuse. So it gives us just a better idea of what is actually in that paint layer. So it's a nice way of really isolating the different paint layers, especially if you have a number of paint layers in here. It can be really, really useful to be able to do that. Okay. Now if you take a look in here, we also have options for exporting our paint layers, so we can save those out as texture files. We can also export those to Photoshop, and we can also adjust color. You can see that down here, and we're actually going to look at that in the next lesson. This is a nice feature here in 2012 to be able to adjust any of these paint layers that we have overall. Okay, so we can also come in and start to delete any of the paint layers that we have here. Okay, so those are the options here for working with multiple paint layers. Just experiment with the different diffuse layers that you can create for the color, and also the different channels that you can create paint layers for. So in the next lesson, we will take a look at actually going ahead and adjusting existing paint layers. We have options for doing that down here with some of these paint tools, and then we also again have options for doing that to our paint layers overall. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that in the next lesson, and then we'll move on to looking at the UV-less P-Tex texture painting. So we'll continue on in the next lesson.